Welcome to Horns of a Dilemma, the podcast of the Texas National Security Review, which is a partnership between War on the Rocks and the University of Texas at Austin. My name is Aaron Stein, Chief Content Officer at War on the Rocks, and what follows is Adam Klein moderating a discussion with Jared Abrams, Ivan Lee, Alex Joel, and Ezra Cohen about technology, the declassification issue, and all things archival research. Enjoy the conversation.
First, I want to start with Ezra Cohen, who many of you may know from yesterday as a member and previously the chair of the Public Interest Declassification Board. He was appointed in January 2021 by President Trump. He served as chair for 2 years and remains a member of the board. Previous to that, he served in senior leadership positions at the Department of Defense and Intelligence Community. Most recently is the acting Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security and Director for Defense Intelligence at ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. He's held many other positions in the Department of Defense, too numerous to name here. He began his career in government at the Defense Intelligence Agency, where he held several roles, including as Deputy Defense Intelligence Officer for South Asia. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in History from the University of Pennsylvania. So Ezra, as a member of the PIDB, as the former chair of the PIDB, the board has spoken quite eloquently about this problem, about the increasing scale of classified information, and we could call it the rate of change is increasing. Classified information is piling up ever faster than before. And you've also spoken about the role that technology can play in this solution as a solution, but perhaps you can start with the problem. Why is technology creating such a mountain of classified information?
With the advent of the digitization of the federal government, really was basically completed in the late 90s, produced this just mountain of digital records at all classification levels that need to be processed. And, of course, we heard on the previous panel that email has really added to that problem. I don't know, I probably send about, 50 to 60 emails a day. And when you're working at that pace, especially in the national security field, where, unfortunately, people really don't have time to go through every single line of every email they write, every correspondence, to make sure that every line is classified properly. So there's a lot of just, blanket classification. People are choosing what's easiest. They're defaulting to overclassification because it's essentially our incentives are set up in such a way that it's the way to stay out of trouble. On the back end, that lack of precision on the front end, on the back end, that creates a very big problem, both in terms of the cost to store these documents, but also to bring about their ultimate release to the public. We have to go through each of these emails now, line by line, to determine what their classification is. And many times, as you know, Adam, these are multi-source emails. So it's not just information from the State Department or the Department of Defense. It's information from, multiple agencies, and many of them have different classification standards. So it becomes extremely complicated on the back end and really at great cost to the American public.
Just to set the level here for people who aren't familiar with how this works, if you work in the intelligence community or in a government position where you're handling classified information, you have to carry forward the classification of the materials you're relying on. And a document takes on the classification level of the highest level of information that's incorporated into it. So if there's one line of top secret information, the entire document is therefore classified as top secret. You're also supposed to do what's called portion marking, and this is what Ezra was alluding to with going through the paragraph. So you're supposed to mark each paragraph or separate section with the highest level of classification in that section. So you can see, first of all, how this can be very time-consuming. Second of all, how a way to save time is simply to mark the entire document at the highest level of classification that could possibly be in there. You're safe, you're covered, and now another top-secret document has been added to the stack. Okay, so we've got a pretty daunting problem here. Billions of emails, perhaps trillions of emails at some point. Ivan, you're a technical expert. You're going to save us from this. And I will now introduce Ivan and tell you why he's qualified to save us. He's the founder and CEO of Datasaur.ai, Datasaur as in dinosaur. Datasaur builds data labeling software for machine learning teams working on natural language processing. He holds bachelor's and master's of computer science degrees from Stanford and has spent his career working in the machine learning, search, and gaming industries. His first company, Loki Studios, was acquired by Yahoo. He's worked at Yahoo and also at Apple.
Yesterday, I flew in from Silicon Valley. I've been working in the AI space for the last decade. But despite that, I hope to present to you today as an AI pragmatist, not as a naive idealist. I've seen the rise and all the hype around AI and deep learning and all these new technologies over the last decade. So I've seen just how powerful this technology can be, but I've also seen the very common pitfalls that people run into as they're implementing these technologies. So specifically, when I heard about this problem, my company has worked with hundreds of folks around the world, data science teams, implementing different types of text classification. So this is a very familiar problem to us. But there are different types of AI problems out there. There are tasks that are less mission critical, or if you get something wrong, it's not that big a deal, right? For example, in search, you get 10 blue links. You're off on the first one, it's okay. They can scroll down, second, third, that's okay. But we also work with healthcare customers, where this is absolutely critical. A misdiagnosis can cost someone's life, right? There's obviously self-driving, which has been much talked about as well. And in that, you have to be absolutely certain of the decisions that the computer is making. So when talking about issues like this, I'm familiar with how important the final outcome can be. We've talked about how it can actually cost lives of the folks, of our allies, the folks that we're working with. So in the AI industry, there's this very common term called human in the loop. I would not be so naive as to say technology can be the be-all, end-all solution for a problem like this. We can't automate every single classification task. But what the machine can do is start suggesting and recommending and augmenting the human intelligence that's already part of the process. So think of something much more similar to the spell check you have in Microsoft Word. Or for the Gmail users out there, every single time they try and recommend how to complete your sentence, right? You don't always have to accept these changes, but if the machine can come in and say, hey, are you sure this is the right classification level? Is this not perhaps underclassified? That can start helping with the problem. As we add more and more data, it can start identifying patterns that we may not even be aware of, right? What I've heard is that there's many different departments, all with their own very specific rules. There's a lot of conflict between those rules. What something like this can do is technology can start coming in and understanding, hey, we think that many of the rules vote in favor of this classification, another rule votes in favor of this one. We recommend this. What do you think, human, right? So that's the way that I would begin approaching this. As software got more and more popular, there just developed this very robust field, one of the most popular classes at Stanford, called human-computer interaction. We had to study and think about how humans are interacting with computers. Well, especially in this day and age, we're entering now a period where we have to study AI-computer interaction. Prior to this, I was working in the Siri group at Apple, right? And we put a lot of research and effort into how you can build trust in a system. And I think that's critical for a conversation like this today. So the final thing I'll close with is, Adam, you had mentioned the scale of this problem, right? We're tossing around numbers like billions of emails, trillions of emails, petabytes of data. That's what, to me, is really exciting on a personal level. Because you can give 1 million examples, and the AI will learn and suggest certain things. You give it 1 billion examples, it's going to get that much better, right? Scale is really what fuels and really allows the best to come out from deep learning neural networks. So, yeah, just as a technologist, I will say I'm very excited about the opportunities here.
Well, that's very uplifting. Normally, you wouldn't think of the phrase 1 trillion government emails as triggering optimism, but I appreciate it. I do want to follow up very quickly. Can you give us a sense, is there a risk that the human will over-rely on cues? And can you tell us very concretely what some of these cues might entail? Is there a risk that the human will over-rely? And then can you tell us an estimate? Let's say the human works at the rate of 1. Are we talking about a 2x increase in how fast the human can go through these things? 3x, 5x, 10x?
Yeah, great question. And I think this is a really important one because if you just read the headlines from the media, you'd see a lot of hype around just how powerful this technology can be, how it's going to remove all of these jobs from the industry, right? But I don't see it working that way. I think that we think about this deeply at our company. We can automate labeling, we can make these suggestions, but we have to do so very carefully, specifically to avoid that problem, right? We don't want the Tesla problem where people are hands-off, taking naps in the car, and just letting the car drive itself. We need to make sure that whatever suggestions we make, first of all, there are multiple phase rollouts. We'll start with the red squiggly for spell check. Like, is this really the classification you want? We get feedback from that system. How many times do people use our red squiggly and say, yeah, you're right, that was incorrect, right? We can start learning and getting better at that problem. The next phase would be where we can start suggesting. We believe, based on 10 million previous examples, that this should be under this type of classification. But we're not going to just enter it there. You have to manually enter and say, yes, I agree with this, right? So you can put in these specific software barriers, artificial barriers at the front to make sure that the human's really buying into the suggestion that's being made.
This is not going to be like the DocuSign where you just click, 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 send, don't know what you just signed.
That's correct.
Okay, that's good. Our other technology expert here is Jared Abrams, who is a research associate at the University of Texas at Austin's Applied Research Labs, which research hard scientific problems for the Department of Defense and intelligence community. And I see Carl Fisher and Marsha, and I know we have some other ARL scientists here, and it is really one of the underappreciated crown jewels of the university system here. Much of their research is classified, so Jared is very well placed to talk about this. He holds a PhD in psychology from New York University. His research focuses on applied machine learning and decision support. Jared, can you tell us about the frontiers of research on things like natural language processing, and what are some of the edge applications that we might be able to apply to these problems?
Yeah, so trying to cue in on some of the things that Ivan said, he mentioned this idea of human in the loop, of decision support, of having a person interact with an automated system in order to make better classification decisions. And again, you, Adam, expressed concern about, again, the Tesla problem, that just sort of hands off the wheels, letting the system roll. And to my mind, that comes down to a question of explainability, of being able to interpret the decisions that are made by a particular automated system. And additionally, how that relates specifically to the problems of the intelligence community in the Department of Defense is to link back the predictions of an automated system to rules that are written in a derivative classification, security classification guide. Just to give a brief explanation of what that means is that most individuals doing classification or declassification on a day-to-day basis in the Department of Defense or the intelligence community, they don't get to decide whether or not something is a risk to national security. They get to decide whether a set of rules that they are given by an original classification authority applies. And so with our own work in developing a decision support tool for supporting initial classification and decision making, we actually encoded a security classification guide and linked back to those rules. That particular system was a bit of a traditional artificial intelligence application using an expert system. It involves a lot of manual encodings. It requires a lot of subject matter expertise. The sorts of models we see these days involve much more, I don't want to say unsupervised learning because that's not actually the correct term here, but learning from the data that is available in the wild rather than having an expert specifically encode things about that. Now, the problem we run into with these models is not knowing why they make the particular decisions that they're making. So if we can ultimately marry those two approaches, the approach of having your automated system that's learned on all of the data that we have, but then concretely link that back to rules in our security classification guides, then we have a powerful and explainable system that ultimately provides some accountability and hopefully then gets at the human in the loop issues that we're concerned with of, we want people to feel comfortable overriding the system. We also want people to feel comfortable letting the system make decisions. And that's a difficult balance to strike. So really, to my mind, that's the frontier in research in this area.
Just a follow-up question there. We all hear, those of us who are not technical experts but are interested in this topic, hear about machine learning, and you need a lot of data, and you sort of set your model loose on the data, and it gradually improves over time. That's a very crude caricature, I know, but doing my best here. In this case, the data sets are classified, and we all know that they don't just let you walk into Fort Meade and play around with the data. How do you train a system on classified data sets? The data may be stored in different places. They probably don't want you combining it. Does the model then take on the classification of the data that it was trained on?
The short answer is yes, it does take on the classification level of the data that it was trained on. This is especially because technically we refer to this as a model can leak data, not the same as leaking as we see in other contexts, but the model can basically say things that it's learned, and that's problematic. These are language models specifically. The issue that we ran into as a group was that precisely that issue. You have a large tranche of data, so we had millions of pages of data to go through and train on, but what you have as a result is a very, very sensitive combination of information at a particular location, and B, a very, very sensitive aggregation of information within a specific model. And those are things that from a security perspective, we really don't want. We want to compartment things. We want to break things apart. We want to make sure that no one person has the keys to the castle, so to speak. And so how you do that and our attempt to solve that was by creating systems by which you have a general part of the solution that you can roll out across multiple locations. So let's take the example of natural language processing. You natural language processing, named entity recognition. So the ability to identify named people, organizations, locations, et cetera, in text, automatically do that at scale and make it all searchable. Well, you can start off with your commercial off-the-source technologies, and you can see what sort of baseline you get in terms of your accuracy. And then these models can be fine-tuned for specific use cases. And that fine-tuning process can be done on sensitive data at the local level. And given the right tools, practitioners at the local level can do that fine-tuning. But it is still a complex process. And actually, tools such as the ones that Ivan's company makes are the kinds of tools that you would need for that. Usable systems for marking your data, marking in the sense of these are people, these are the names of sources, I want to protect these, and then moving forward. Additionally, we did have a lot of success with the creation of expert systems that do key into specific databases. So sometimes you do want to just do explicit name checks. Are these people in a list of sources? Are these people in a list of, insert role here? For that, traditional access controls and traditional database setups throughout the IC are already amenable to that sort of solution. So really, it's a matter of trying to figure out what we can automate with general purpose solutions, and then also figuring out what does require a specific solution, and then having the appropriate risk management framework for dealing with those sorts of situations.
So our last panelist, but certainly not least, is Alex Joel, who's a scholar in residence at the Washington College of Law at American University in Washington, D.C. He conducts research and does other things related to the law, national security, technology, and privacy. Previously, he was a senior officer with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, where until June 2019, he was chief of the Office of Civil Liberties, Privacy, and Transparency. Just in lieu of reciting the rest of his official bio, I will just say that Alex is someone I've known going back a fair number of years now, and is truly one of the most impressive leaders who has done this work inside the intelligence community to drive transparency, drive declassification, and has wrestled with the toughest problems and how to get this information out into the public realm, in particular after the Snowden disclosures, which you may have heard of, which caused a spike in demand for transparency around some of the most sensitive technical and programmatic capabilities that the US government has. And if you compare what was available out there before Alex entered office and after he left in terms of declassified legal opinions, statistical transparency, and so forth, it's a world of difference. It's like going from the cave paintings into 3D holograms for those of us who study this topic. So it's really great to have Alex here, especially because hopefully you will tell us how some of these ideas and hopes that we have for letting technology in and letting it make decisions perhaps will come into conflict with some of the realities of declassifying things about NSA technical capabilities, CIA human source operations, and so forth. But before I just let you go free, I'm going to make you answer a couple questions for us based on things that have come up today. Is it true that something old should probably be declassified? Is it suspect that old things remain classified? And second, is it suspect that something public or known to an adversary would still be classified? And if the answer to those questions, as I think it is no, can you tell us why, please? And then you can say whatever you want after that.
Well, I do think on the first question that the older something is, the less likely you will find a compelling argument that it needs to remain classified. But there are reasons why historical records or records going back 25 years, 30 years are classified. One of the things that we encounter is that either a source of information may still be alive, or that source's family may still be alive. And depending on where that individual is located, this could be highly problematic. Or it could relate to a series of policy measures in a country that still have life today that were, that the U.S. had some role in that was classified back at the time. And so you will face, and I know that the people in this room here know this better than I do, but there are reasons why historical records, or even records going back a few years that are of current interest, need to remain classified to protect secrets. We spend, when I was in the intelligence community, a huge amount of time trying to find out what adversaries knew about us, and they spent a huge amount of time trying to find out things that we knew. So I have no question that if you look at some historical documents today, you can find out, oh, that secret was actually known by the adversary, but that sometimes and often is not known to the intelligence agencies at the moment. There's a lot of time being spent trying to keep that information from the adversary because we don't know what the adversary knows, and especially if it's a hard target, it can be very difficult to find that information out. So I will say that if you want to make progress, for those of us who, what I learned, I'll just keep it to my own experience in trying to, enhance transparency from inside the intelligence community is rule number one, or the starting point is we must accept the importance of keeping secrets in the national security space. You will not be a credible voice on transparency if you don't accept that a fundamental premise. Even though I was a champion of transparency, I always said a fully transparent intelligence service is a fully ineffective one. You have to be able to keep secrets. Now, having said that, we're in a democracy. You also have to have public transparency. And so it's that tension that creates all the problem. And yes, right now we have erred on the side of overclassification. There's no question. I mean, everybody inside the intelligence community acknowledges that there's that marking is going on documents that don't need to have that marking. And so that's absolutely the case, but it comes from a place of trying to protect those secrets that, if revealed, could in fact harm national security. And as somebody has said in this conference before, when you're talking about national security professionals, you have people whose lives are dedicated to protecting national security, right? That's what they've committed their work toward. And so they will, of course, have a very strong concern about being responsible themselves for something that might harm national security. And I guess one last thing I'll say is that when you were thinking about human in the loop, first of all, I'm super excited about these technologies, but I also see that there's some challenges. But I'm absolutely excited, and I love the fact that the more electronic records there are, the greater fidelity there will be with the resulting data. So I didn't realize that we were creating training data for these AI algorithms, but I'm glad that that's what's actually happening. The idea of a human in the loop is, of course, essential, and it brings to mind. I was asking myself the question, what harms national security? What information, if released, could harm national security, which is the basic test. And then I thought, well, asking that question is like asking a lawyer, what is legal and illegal here, right? Is this legal? And the lawyer will tell you, well, it depends. And that's also what someone worried about keeping national security secrets will say. Well, it depends. What does the adversary already know? What is the context around which this is being released? What information has previously been released? Are we talking about a specific source, a specific method? Is that method still in use? Who put this original classification marking on here? Do I know enough about what impact this might have to myself make that decision. Somebody was mentioning in a prior panel that they were surprised that there was a sentence in documents that had been released. And I'm like, I don't have 100% confidence that a lot of people, the right people thought about whether that sentence should have been released. Maybe the person who made that comment should have been part of that if they had a clearance. And maybe that person would have said, no, that should not be released. So it's who are you consulting? How much time do you have? What's the information that's already out there? What is the method that's being used? Is the fact of the agency's interest in this classified? I'm not trying to argue for overclassification because I want the transparency work very much to go on, but I'm just saying as a starting point, it's really important to acknowledge the challenge and the reasons why we act the way we act in the intelligence community.
And I think that's such an important point, right? We want technology to speed this up and hopefully automate it, but there are incredibly subtle human judgments here. There are interagency equities that have to be dealt with. Alex, is there an example that you can think of something that was a hard call that was ultimately resolved in favor of declassification such that you can talk about it now? And how wrenching it might have been to get to that call?
Sure. This is there's so many examples, but this one is a very simple one that I was just thinking about it this morning. So under one of our critical authorities, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which you were asking the director about last night, that's up for reauthorization. We had, of course, enormous pressure to be more transparent on that, and so we accomplished a great deal. But before the Snowden disclosures, we had that authority, and I remember wanting to talk about that authority in greater detail in public settings. And one thing that's well known now is that this authority can be used when there are appropriate circumstances with court supervision to access certain email communications, that are handled by email providers, serving them a directive under the statute, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to be able to use the word email, which that word does not appear in the statute. And I actually met with the counterterrorism analysts who were working the counterterrorism problem, since 9/11. And they were extraordinarily passionate about the work they were doing and the importance of it. And I remember them having tears in their eyes telling me I could not say the word email. And of course, now we say it all the time. That's been declassified. Yes, for example, email. And that was because some of the people that were being tracked had not yet, had the light bulb go off. So even disclosing something as seemingly innocuous as that was a major challenge. We're beyond that now, which is an interesting thing with these machine learning and the application of rules, et cetera, that you guys have been talking about. Is I think that it's super instructive to go back and think about what was classified and then what has been declassified, and if you do a comparison of those, because I still think that there are plenty of people in the intelligence agencies who, and even here talking about this, and I'm out now, I get, my heart rate goes up hearing about some of these topics, but some people are still operating under traditional assumptions about what is, needed to protect sources and methods when in fact, we've already disclosed.
This question is for every panelist, and I'd like your quick gut reaction to it. Will we ever allow AI or a machine of any kind to declassify something without human review?
So I want to introduce one other concept. I think what Jared brought up earlier about explainability is a really important topic right now in the world of AI, actually. You can imagine, right, for healthcare reasons too, you can't just say, look, this is the diagnosis or this is what we recommend. You need to explain why did the algorithm reach this decision. Same thing with this, with the declassification use case. The other important output from an algorithm is a confidence score, right? So we don't have to make a prediction on every single document. It is important to let the technology say, I'm not really sure on this one. You figure it out, right? So for all of these very complex edge cases, I think we should start with no technology for some of these documents and emails. But think about, I'll just try to underestimate this, think about the 30% that are complete no-brainers, right? Very simple. I heard at dinner last night someone was talking about how there was a public newspaper document that was classified, right? But it's already in public domain. If you can take these and just use technology to automatically declassify, that can save the people's time and effort. That can save 30%.
You didn't answer my question, but can we pause? That is very interesting, though. So can we pause there? Alex, Do you agree that just because, right? So if a public newspaper, it's a public newspaper card, but it's in a CIA file that contains all kinds of other communications that tells you why they were very interested or suggests that this newspaper article was extremely interesting to CIA.
Right.
So Alex, do you accept that a public newspaper article should just be declassified automatically?
Well, you set me up. No, I don't. I do not accept that.
Okay, Ivan. Yes or no? Will a computer ever declassify something without a human in the loop?
I don't think we should attempt it for a number of years.
Okay.
I'm going with no. I don't think so. I think that while we've seen tremendous advances in the technology, and while Ivan's right to point out issues of confidence scores, I think that really when these models fail, they don't tend to fail in ways that are readily interpretable to humans at the present time. And that's even with the most advanced technologies coming out of the most prestigious companies that are working and universities that are working on this. So I would say no, not in the near term by any stretch.
Yeah, I would say no, but I just want to emphasize how excited I am about the prospect of how technology will help. And will help the human in the loop reach more accurate and faster decisions. And I think that's super important.
I'd say, well, you said ever, so that's a long time. I would say yes. I think that it is possible. And it may not be, though, from top secret SCI to unclassified, right? The automatic declassification might be from top secret to secret. A decision to push certain information to our allies. And by the way, that information doesn't mean an email or a report. It could be, a signal that we've received in some way that's needed to have, battlefield situational awareness, right? And those types of things probably will be able to be automatically declassified or downgraded. I think that a lot of this, though, is cultural. So, one example that the board looked at was some of the cultural changes that were made at NGA.
Can you just explain to everyone what NGA is, who may not know?
The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And we referenced this yesterday. Many of these agencies have a culture of every office has its own security classification guide, every office within the agency. And at NGA, they decided to change the culture. They were going to consolidate all of this and have one security classification guide. And I think there were a lot of naysayers at first until they saw it worked out. And now they see it's a great idea. So I think a lot of this is really just changing the culture. It's not going to happen overnight, but if you give me ever, I'll say yes. So,
staying with Ezra here, as we mentioned in the introduction, this technology has to be deployed within a government that we have, that has institutions that have their own particularities, let's just say. Ezra, how do you think the government needs to change, if indeed it does, to actually use this technology effectively for this purpose?
Yeah, so I think, look, step one is setting up an organization where it's going to be successful. And because of the scale of the problem, and also the fact that there's very limited funding for this issue, I think we need to create economies of scale. So, and you also mentioned the equity process. I think the equity, when people say that in the intelligence community, it's code for conflict between agencies. So I think that the step one is there really needs to be a program office that exists outside of the intelligence community, maybe at the Office of Management and Budget. And the reason for that is the IC isn't the only agency generating classified material. DoD is never going to accept just culturally a system that comes from within the IC. CIA is not going to accept a system that came from within CIA. And you could find many other dynamics like that. So I think we need a program office that will essentially research, acquire, and then mandate across the whole U.S. government a common AI system. And it needs to be funded. And I see we have some people here from Congress. Most important thing is it needs to be funded.
So talking about this problem, we've got a mountain. We want to think of ways to use technology to make the mountain smaller, but I think we also have to note that we are actually making the mountain bigger in some other ways. One thing that I haven't heard anyone mention yet is something called controlled unclassified information, which is this idea that now unclassified information has to be marked in the same crazy Byzantine way that classified information does. And in fact, you can Google it, there's a controlled unclassified information guide with 50 different symbols. It's like going into an Egyptian hieroglyphics situation. And so now we've got new reasons that information can potentially be withheld from the public, even if it does not threaten the national security of the United States. And so we do not want to be making the mountain bigger. We are actually making the mountain bigger, even where there's no national security threat. So I do want to put that out there. But getting back to our topic here, is it possible that we're approaching the problem wrong? We are thinking about this mountain, we're thinking about this as a volume challenge, but in fact, not all information is equally useful for the purposes that we care about: informing history, democratic accountability, democratic decision making. And just drawing from my experience here a bit, we did a review of an NSA program, a large-scale collection program. This resulted in a public declassified report. And we had to wrestle with the government about specific facts that were in the report with ODNI, God bless them. And one of the facts was the cost of the program, a program that was concluded and that did not involve a ton of specialized high-tech gear where this would be particularly useful insight for adversaries. And they redacted the cost of the program, which was, I think, $100 million, but we got it declassified eventually. And so we had to wrestle with them, and we said this is very important for the public to understand. Eventually, they yielded on that. That's one fact. Right? And we invested a lot of human time in getting that fact out there. But of course, it was very valuable for public understanding. You compare that to a mound of potentially 1 million emails that are being bounced around between GS-12s at an agency. Is perhaps a hack to get around this problem triaging information in terms of its importance and value instead of trying to just get through the mound faster? Alex, maybe you could weigh in on that quickly. And then.
Yeah, and I think that would I think feed into some of the challenges that implementing technology would have in this area. I totally agree that there needs to be prioritization, and there's so many problems about that the intelligence community is facing along these lines. I can't even think of where to start. But you have external requests, demands that you have to meet from FOIA litigation. So the same people who are working on automatic declassification and mandatory declassification reviews and all the kinds of reviews that people are familiar with here may well be part of the same office, and in some cases the same individuals working on FOIA requests. So that FOIA litigation jumps to the top of the line because there's a hard deadline, and if you're going to be held in contempt of court if you don't meet it. At the same time, you have all of these other things happening. You have the executive orders, clocks ticking away. You have the mandatory declassification review that I mentioned. You have people like me coming in and saying, the statute's up for reauthorization. We have to push through, declassifying all these things. You have something that happens in the outside world, like Russia invading Ukraine, and then you're again pulling on some people. And these things also pull on the actual experts working the problem, because the classification folks aren't going to know what the current impact is of something without consulting with the experts. So now you're pulling these people away from their mission and having them sit in a conference room looking line by line over a document because the chairman of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board wants to declassify this sentence. So that's a good reason. That's a very good. That's a positive reason. So there's all kinds of challenges. I do think that prioritizing by topic and by category, like you said, the emails aren't necessarily that important, nor will they be carefully marked or thoughtfully marked. So I don't think they're going to be much use, frankly, as training data, as excited as I became about that idea. The ones that are most thoughtfully marked are the final products of whatever process is going through. That's going to be should be line by line focused on it. If I may say, the lawyers' products right now that are going up in front of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, because we know that transparency is coming at the end of that line, are going to be extremely thoughtfully marked. And so those would be something that you could focus on and learn a lot. The drafts that led up to it, the emails with drafts and everything, it would be interesting to know what was being said that might be withheld for other reasons, deliberative process privilege. But I think that those final documents would be most interesting and useful.
Just to give everyone a sense of the process that we used to go through, we would write a report, we would attempt our portion markings, because we were derivative classifiers. So we had to follow how the agency had marked and classified things. And so then we would send that over to the agency. They would go through every line and sometimes correct our markings. Then they would propose redactions. Then we would argue with them over the redactions. After the comma, can you please declassify that piece at least? So this was down to the level of individual words, even punctuation sometimes, from our perspective to try to get as much out there as possible. But this is how fine-grained these judgments can be at some point. So one last question for our tech experts, and then I want audience members to get ready with your questions. Is there a piece of consumer technology that's out there that you think best illustrates the potential for AI in this space? And you've developed some, Ivan, so you can say Datasaur, but something that the average person is using that we would all be familiar with.
I won't go with Datasaur. I'll go with something that is very much in the spotlight right now, ChatGPT, right? For those of you who haven't played with it yet, I encourage you to do so before OpenAI starts charging for it. It's a really interesting technology. And for me, again, from a personal technologist perspective, super excited to see what the evolution of this technology looks like. I want to tie this back in actually to Alex's previous response, because breaking it down and saying we want to focus on this topic first actually helps the technology. We talked about how there's already this training data. Taking 60s era documents and using that as training data is not going to help very much with the classification, categorization of emails from today, right? But if we can say, look, we think it's for the public interest to focus on declassifying everything about, let's say, the Vietnam War, then we can train a model specifically tailored towards that and do a better job with that. ChatGPT right now is this universal, solution for everything. And what people are very quickly realizing is it's not great for healthcare. You need to train something specifically for healthcare. It's not great for, fintech, financial technologies. You have to train something specifically in that domain. So going domain by domain will actually be very useful as we approach the problem.
So this is going to be a kind of mundane answer, but I think that search and document similarity. So historically, we have interacted with search engines such as Google, and there's folks in the IC, folks in the DOT are like, why can't we have Google for our own documents? Why can't we find things better? And the answer is because Google had a bunch of data. This was not machine learning at first, but they had a bunch of data that they could use to rank pages and make decisions about what to show people in response to a search. I feel like things like semantic search using some of the modern transformer models. So semantic search, finding things that are similar in meaning rather than simple keyword matches. Though those technologies, I believe, have improved in a fairly dramatic way over the past several years, and that allows us to start rolling out those search capabilities into sensitive environments. And where that's useful is when you are a review officer, when you are trying to declassify documents, the first step is even finding things in what you have that are responsive to a request, and then finding other similar material that has already been reviewed and trying to maintain consistency with those reviewed decisions. If something has already been released, then you can release this. If something has not been released, then you want to figure out why and make your decisions appropriately. So I think that sort of democratizing search capability and the ability to find similar and duplicate documents is really probably a major step forward.
That's great. That's very interesting.
Could I just jump in and follow up on that? Because one of the things that a range of reasons I'm very excited about this whole topic, but one of them is, and I'm not the technology expert, so you guys would know, is what I imagine would have to take place in order to train and develop. Like I would imagine you would want to have good, clean electronic data to work from. I would imagine you would need for paper documents scan and reliable OCR. I'd imagine there'd be some indexing going on, some labeling going on, common formatting. Those are things that have to be done anyway, right? And to have the excitement around Congress funding a major AI effort to deal with declass, and in order to do that, you need to do all these things to improve electronic record keeping, which would have benefits regardless of whether the AI works or not. I'm very excited about, because I think that is necessary. It's going to happen. Somebody asked last night a very good question, which was, or yesterday afternoon, do we have a record of all classified information? And, no, the answer was no, not in the sense of printing out. Some of things are numbered and you'll know, oh, I have to get copy 17 back. Who's got copy 17? But most of it is not, obviously, in the sense that we're thinking of it. In another sense, it's all recorded, right? Mm-hmm. Everything electronic, there is a record. And we rely on that record. We rely on those audit trails for a number of different things in government. It's automatically being stored, and then there are storage periods for different kinds of data, and then you take that data, and is it discoverable? Can other agencies find out that you have already done this report or a similar report? So having a real effort to take all of that data and make it more useful and uniform and tag it and label it. That's in some ways that's what the IT folks in the agencies have been doing for a long time. An infusion of funding to and purposefully directing that to declassification would be terrific, I think.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Horns of a Dilemma. Do not forget to read the Texas National Security Review, which you can find at tnsr.org.